I grew up in Moscow in one of those tall concrete block buildings so typical of our Soviet period. So going out in the nature was always sort of a special occasion. Maybe that's what informs my appreciation of Florida's landscape. So the natural landscape here is still quite untamed, even though there's this illusion that we paved over it and there's concrete poured and the streets are safe from it sort of taking over again. And of course, as we experience here many times a year, there's no such thing. The streets get routinely flooded. There are frozen iguanas falling down from the trees in winter, and there are huge manatees floating in rivers, like in my photo of Miami River from 2018. That's just downtown, surrounded by skyscrapers, and yachts, and yet here we are. The project that you're referring to, I think, is Landscape Sublime. It's an ongoing project. It's all studio based. Um, this is a project where I find images online in public domain or Creative Commons license. I print them out. I sculpt them. Sort of I score them to achieve particular geometric forms, and then I arrange them into these three-dimensional tableaus, which I then rephotograph and sort of flatten the space again. Um, it has to do with my background in architecture, really environmental design. Um, so the project, I think, stems from those roots. And then later on, with my interest in typologies of images that are available online in incredible quantities. So yeah, that project is ongoing. I'm now branching out into a sort of sub-series within it. It's called Metropolises. And that's the one that bridges both the studio work and my field work with FloodZone and my environmental interests. In terms of that shift between representational images and abstracted sort of collage-like compositions from Landscape Sublime, the two projects are ongoing. Really, all of my work since graduating with my MFA degree is ongoing. So it's sort of deeper explorations into each subject, and kind of a commitment to a topic and to a certain aesthetic within. To me, they're really intertwined, and I like to toggle between them, so neither is sort of ended and then the other one begins. They happen parallel to each other, and they sort of feed off each other as well. I know that my field work for FloodZone wouldn't have been possible without 7 years in the studio. The way I see things is very much informed by my studio work, and then vice versa. Now I'm going back to those constructed still lifes, and they're inspired by some of the things that I've seen in real life. So my Landscape Sublime project is quite multi-layered, um, metaphorically and literally. I take images from the internet and then I print them out, I sculpt them, and then rephotograph them. It initially sort of began with my inquiry into aesthetic categories. I was looking at the sublime from the perspective of sort of technological sublime, but then at its roots, sublime is defined as something so great and vast, so much bigger than us humans that it can be terrifying. Some philosophers like Kant and Schopenhauer used examples from nature to explain the sublime, like desert sky or waterfalls, crashing waves. So these are my search terms. I was an early adopter of Flickr. This is pre-Instagram. Um, so I would browse vast archives of images shared by hobbyists and all kinds of levels of photographers. There were way fewer selfies at the time, so the website was there for sort of aesthetic appreciation of those images. And I was paying attention to the types of images that would gain sort of popularity through Flickr's various filters. And there are certain groups there that would sort of surface to the top of those search engines. And I noticed most of those were kind of following certain formulas. So I looked into typical compositions of picturesque landscape painting, and it seemed like photography was really following in its tracks. So the project is about that. It's sort of about following certain conventions, about the kind of imagery that can be found online in big masses, um, and about the kind of images we tend to share, sort of human presence in various landscapes. As I mentioned, I come from Moscow, where I studied environmental design. So this was my first degree, and photography initially was just a means to record those models of buildings and various spaces that I had to create by hand. Our university was quite classical, with strong Bauhaus and constructivist roots. I was, of course, inspired by our famous avant-garde, especially by the women, the Amazons of Russian avant-garde, Natalia Goncharova being my favorite. She was known for her everythingism, a term used to describe her really diverse approach to art making. So I guess I'm an adopter of that, with my Landscape Sublime being so, studio-based and constructed, and then my observational photography, I think, still referencing that practice. So with FloodZone, I wanted to show the everydayness of climate change. I mean, the subject is in the name, and it's very much a lived experience. There's a new term that's gaining popularity, climate anxiety. So FloodZone for me is the embodiment of that feeling. Um, Being certain that we're living with the change right now, this is not coming from some external force. We're in it, it's only going to get worse. And yet at the same time, you can't deny the beauty of this region. You can't deny the desire to live by the water. It's evidenced by the number of people moving to coastal areas, right? And yet we know that the coast is sinking.